welcome to London.
Thank you.
I heard you got in yesterday, or the day before, but yesterday, I think.
Yes.
Could you tell us and everyone who might watch in the future what Palestine was like at the time of you guys leaving to come here?
You want to go? Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you here today. And thank you for inviting us and having us, Zena. It would have been hard to, or it is actually hard to replace Reverend Munder, but let's try. So yes, how we left the West Bank. I don't think we have the adequate terminology to really give an accurate depiction of what it's really like in the West Bank. I mean, you look at the news and you will see the statistics and numbers, the incursions in Jenin that have left massive destructions in the city, all of the West Bank being a heavily militarized area that really impacts the smallest details of your lives to the biggest ones. When I say it impacts, it basically violates fundamental rights. So Reverend Munder not being able to come here is literally, what we're all experiencing on a daily basis. For instance, I can no longer go from Bethlehem to Ramallah to attend meetings. I miss my visa appointment, for example, because the Israeli army decided to set up a gate in my hometown and they closed it arbitrarily like that. So I fear for my son going to his school because now there's a constant presence of the army and the settlers. You know, it's becoming a situation of chronic worry and, I would call it torture, psychological and mental torture. The violations are on a staggering surge. In terms of numbers and severity. Talk about land confiscation, settlement expansion, blocking the freedom of movement entirely, torture at the checkpoint, detention at the checkpoints, arbitrary detentions, nightly raids, or daily raids even. They're no longer nightly raids. Every single violation has been on a significant rise post-October the 7th. None of them was created before October the 7th, was created after October the 7th, but they're all on a significant surge. So I'm not sure if Mays, you want to add to that?
Of course. I mean, it would be good for all of you to know how is it for a Palestinian to get out of Palestine? I mean, our journey is a depiction of the violation of human rights that we face on a daily basis. For me and Dalia to be able to be with you here today meant that we had to leave Palestine 2 days earlier to our flight because. Israel has control over our borders, so they can control it and open it whenever they want and close it whenever they want. And obviously, we predicted that this would happen, so we were cautious. We left earlier, and unlike Reverend Munder, this has affected him, it's a long journey to be here, but we're happy to shed light on our struggle post-October 7th, which has been the same before October 7th, but worsened and worsened. So this is,
So I want to take it then into the two directions, the spatial and the temporal. So let's go the temporal first, because you both talked about how, obviously we know this, that history didn't begin on October the 7th, and it's so boring to even actually have to talk about it. To be in the UK climate over the last year or so has been to essentially reinvent history, whereby October 7th is day one, and everything has to happen in response to October 7th. But everything you've both said, the macro and the micro, obviously predates October 7th and is part of the ongoing Nakba. That is the important framing to actually bear in mind as we talk about the situation as it stands today. I'm curious about this shift that October 7th brought on. So materially, that might be the checkpoints and things like that. But I'm also curious about what effect did that date have in terms of affecting a Palestinian experience since? How has it felt like to exist as a Palestinian in Palestine, but not in Gaza after October the 7th?
I personally don't like to make the distinguishment between pre-October 7th and post-October 7th. But I mean, after October 7th, you feel that your life is monitored. You are targeted as a Palestinian. Every word you say, every movement you make is controlled. There is no one to go to seek protection if an Israeli soldier comes to your house and harasses you, harasses your father, your mother, arrests, rapes. I mean, this is the uncertainty, as Reverend Wonder described it. But yeah, it's the uncertainty of our life as Palestinians. It's you cannot go. You cannot resort to anyone to seek protection. It's a constant battle to keep the hope alive within you, and yeah, I mean, influence the future generations to do the same. And I'm always asked, how do you keep yourself going? How do you keep yourself motivated? And I'm like, I mean, my parents have put a lot to raise me and to belong to this land. So I want to give that to my children. I want to be the extension of the Palestinian presence in Palestine, and also the Palestinian Christians' presence in Palestine, something that I try to advocate for as a Palestinian Christian working for Kairos Palestine.
I'm curious as well, Dalia, in terms of,
Yes.
well,
I mean, October the 7th, I mean, it happened in Gaza, it's true, but it's a big fallacy to really think that Gaza and the West Bank are separate. You know, they're not. What happened in Gaza was immediately felt, in the same moment was felt in the West Bank. Now, if we're talking about the experience, how it makes us feel, I think I'm juggling many contradictive emotions all together in the same day, every day since October the 7th. I mean, on the one hand, and I think my experience would resonate with what many Palestinians feel there in Palestine. On the one hand, we are super angry. We are angry the way that we are dehumanized for, I mean, I don't want to say for 11 months, but for 76 years also before that. We are frustrated that there's no adequate language that would help us, like, you know, express. Many times I'm trying to share an Instagram post and I want to add my comment, and then I stop and just share it as is because I feel frustrated. I do not have the means to communicate how I feel about it. I am frustrated because I don't see sometimes how tomorrow is going to be a better day. I am a Palestinian mother. I look and I see my child in every child from Gaza, and I see myself in every mother also. in Gaza, and I think of it and it drives me crazy. Like, you know, I am anxious. I go like, how do we heal from this? When can we start to heal from this? And how do we ever do we ever get to heal from this? I mean, the words of Reverend Munder, they give you some reassurance that we will heal from this. But, you know, I'm very careful about romanticizing our, you know, our sumud. It's tough. It's very difficult. The logic of power hits you really hard when you're there. I'm a human rights lawyer myself. I work with the international law and all, what have you. But the logic of power has its ways to make you sit down for a while and, you know, become very frustrated. But at the same time, I make a conscious and deliberate decision to find every day some hope that would keep me going. If not for me, for my child, for his generation. I was always like, you know, one of the people who hated the question. I hated it. Like, how do you find hope? It's like a make me feel good question. Like, yeah, make me feel good about you having hope. I always struggled with that. But then I deliberated this and I was like, hope is a choice you make, and I want to make that choice. I'll share something personal to the extent where I had a tattoo on my arm to make myself hopeful. Here, this is, you know, a symbol of the Palestinian spring. This is what we have on our trees in the spring. So I tattooed hope on my arm to remind myself every day that we have to be hopeful. We don't have the luxury to basically sit back and watch everything that's going on and feel bad about ourselves. It's not easy, but, you know, I cannot accept us being dehumanized and indignified this way. If not for me, it's for the generation of my son.
It's funny, I mean, I was on a panel with Mehdi Sabagh, who actually edited the Palfas book that just came out, and I think is for sale outside, and would really recommend it. It's such an excellent collection. And one of the questions from the audience was, I think, a well-meaning member, but who asked this question with, where do you find the hope? And it was kind of lobbed out there. And then we had to kind of, me and the all-Palestinian panel kind of had a moment where we were like, oh my God. Because the performance of hope has been extremely hard work in itself. At the same time, succumbing to despair and depression is a privilege that we don't have. So we're kind of torn between what witnessing a genocide looks like and then the conviction to keep fighting the genocide at the same time. And that is sort of an infinite loop that is very exhausting and very difficult to overcome. But that's kind of what I loved in the Reverend's remarks about the concept of rage. I like that there wasn't too much of an emphasis on peace at the expense of rage. Actually, this is disgusting. We have rage. Rage is what is important in this moment, and also it's what has divided us, those who feel rage and those who do not. And those who do not are those who allow it to happen, either by actively doing it or tacitly endorsing it. And those who feel rage and feel conscience and say, actually, no, you know, we're going to fight this with everything that we have. I think particularly sitting in the UK or in the Western world, there's this feeling that people aren't paying attention, yes, which I'm sure is, you know, friends who come back recently from Palestine say, as terrible as the situation is, at least everyone is feeling the same level of despair at the same time, versus here, the conversation you have with the postman or the TFL guy, and you feel like you're going mad and everything is the same. Yeah. But I'm curious about this, going back to the spatial aspect and the question we had about Gaza as a separate place. That a lot of the work that is happening, and actually in a way that I feel October the 7th problematized, is the fragmentation of the Palestinian identity. So as we know, Palestinians are split across 5 at least different demarcations: Palestinians in the West Bank, Jerusalem, the occupied Gaza Strip as well, besieged Gaza Strip. 1948 Palestinians who live with Israeli ID, diaspora Palestinians who live probably stateless in the region, and then diaspora Palestinians who live in the rest of the world who might have statehood. Those are many different legal categories, let alone all the different variations and multiplicities, religious, racial, age, gender, sex, all the rest that go into that. In what way do you think this period that we're in is an opportunity to defy that fragmentation and to imagine an alternative way of being Palestinian that is not dependent or contingent on the fragmentation of Palestinians into this Palestinian identity and that Palestinian identity? Are we in a moment of actually forging an alternative Palestinian future through a remodeling or reimagining of a Palestinian identity?
It's a massive opportunity to do that. I mean, I think if you look at the context, I have to be careful as I use my words, but one of the blocks was really like this Oslo framework, and then, you know, betting on the PA having good relations with the US, and the US influencing this kind of negotiations with Israel. So we were really limited to the Oslo framework. And I think that has proven to be a complete failure in light of what's happening. Like this ultra-nationalist Kahanist government of Israel does not even like the PA. They don't see the PA anywhere. It's a full-on annexation project and colonization project of all of the land from the river to the sea. And I think one of the, I don't want to say good things, but, you know, having that framework like really falling is a perfect momentum for us Palestinians to reimagine how we want to practice our right to self-determination as people, all of us. Palestinians who are supposed to vote are the ones in the West Bank. What about the ones in Gaza, Jerusalem, those who survived the Nakba in 1948 and stayed there? Our diaspora in their millions, our refugees and diaspora in their millions. I think it's a perfect momentum. My concern is really finding that leadership who would be able to unify Palestinians and, you know, basically start maybe with reforming the PLO in order to do that. I don't know, there are many different possibilities and scenarios, but it is definitely a moment to do that as Palestinian people.
I think we're not used to, we're always identifying and like defining ourselves based on geography and religion and, you know, territory. And for example, I always say I'm a Palestinian Christian coming from the city of Bethlehem the West Bank. And there's always an emphasis on fragmenting and, you know, dividing our identities to educate to the world that we do exist, you know, Christians in Bethlehem. And we also forget that there are Christians in Gaza. What I'm trying to emphasize is that we feel that we are isolated. We're trying to represent our identities, our unique Palestinian and Christian identities, but we're failing, or it's a truly challenging feeling to define at this moment. But what we want, yes, is for us, for example, to go to Gaza at some point. And, you know, I've never really met a Palestinian from Gaza. I've never been to the occupied cities in 45 occupied cities. We feel that we are each in our cities, in our location, divided. And we would like to advocate for a Palestinian identity wherever we are. This is our hopes and our aims, rather than always emphasizing our geographical and our religious. We are Palestinians.
I do feel like, particularly, I mean, what you were saying about the literal cordoning off and barricading of your geography, but also, like you were saying, the mental fragmentation that's going on as well. I feel like increasingly we're becoming more and more atomized as Palestinians, in that it kind of collapses into, it went from sort of being a cause into, the more under threat you are, the more kind of it breaks down into its component parts. And I think, in a way, what we saw with the student encampments when they happened, and I think there might actually be some students here, in which case, all power to you, and I wish the new semester brings strength in your organizing, but also in just the protest movement across the world in response to this, is that this is not a single issue. This is, Palestine is everywhere and everywhere is Palestine. And in the way that Palestine teaches us, we also teach the Palestinian cause, I think, as well. It's a sort of very symbiotic relationship. So I'd like to hear more. I'm curious about what your reflections are about the Palestinian Christian experience has been like in Gaza. Like you said, I think it's very convenient for the Israeli discourse to frame this as a clash of civilizations, right? As the barbaric East versus the civilized West, Judeo-Christian Europe versus angry Muslims. I mean, these are all really boring war on terror dichotomies, but the Israelis can't seem to think of fresher narratives, so that's what we're using at the moment. So I'm curious, particularly, I mean, I know that there have been destruction of very ancient monuments. There has been the slaughter of remaining Palestinian Christian communities, also the bombardment of sacred grounds. I would love to hear a bit more about what the experience might have been like for those communities left in Gaza today.
I mean, as you rightfully point, Zena, the very little community left in Gaza is surviving a genocide, with whatever that term means. The bombardment, the direct targeting of, the churches, historic churches, one of the oldest in the world, St. Porphyrius Church in Gaza, the killing of the members of the community, the targeting of church-affiliated institutions like the Ma'madani Hospital. It's a genocide, and they're barely trying to survive it, just like the rest of Palestinians. And at Balasan, the organization that I'm directing, we submitted an urgent appeal to the UN saying that Israeli policies are exterminating Palestinian Christian presence, not only in Gaza, but I said, on both sides of the Green Line. So it's really important to highlight what's going on in Gaza. This is, one of the earliest denominations of Christianity in the world, and it's being exterminated deliberately at this point in time in Gaza. But also, if you look at the global picture, I mean, one of the Israeli talking points is that Israel is the only place where Christians numbers grow in the Middle East. And I mean, it takes basic fact-checking to see. I mean, if you were to lie, at least you shouldn't have that much audacity to say something that's very easily verifiable. Us Palestinian Christians, we used to compose up to 12% in historic Palestine. Immediately after the Nakba, like the following year, 1949, the number dropped to 3%. You want to know why? It's the Nakba, because the concentration of Palestinian Christians was up north, not in Bethlehem, not in Jerusalem. It was up. The number immediately dropped, and that's a very sharp decline. And it continued to decline from 3% until now. We're at a point where we say we're a bit less than 1%, especially after October the 7th. So many, Palestinian Christians and Muslims to immigrate, or basically are forcibly displaced. You know, when you create a very coercive environment and the people leave, you can't call it immigration. It's just, you know, the environment is so coercive that they had to leave. They wouldn't have left if it wasn't for that coercive environment. So, and then every single policy that Israel applied in the occupied West Bank, including Jerusalem, in the areas it occupied in 1948, all of these were also driving factors that drove Palestinian Christians out. I mean, no one believes that Bethlehem is literally, it's the neighbor of Jerusalem, and there's an Israeli ideology that perceives it as part of a greater Jerusalem, hence all of these settlements that are eating up Bethlehem and so. So psychologically, we think of Jerusalem as, you know, somewhere that's really far, that's inaccessible, and so on. But when you talk about Bethlehem and Jerusalem in Christian terms, for the first time in over 2,000 years, we had many occupations in Palestine, as you know, but for the first time, Bethlehem is physically separated from Jerusalem because of Israeli policies. And in Christianity, this means that's a massive deal, because one city represents nativity and the other city represents resurrection. And then when you separate those, you're separating two pillars of the Christian faith. Not to mention that, you know, as Palestinian Christians, we cannot just go to Jerusalem. It's 5 kilometers away from where I live. I will have to get a permit from the Israeli military, go through the designated checkpoint only, in a very humiliating procedure, as you know, and dangerous procedures. One of the most dangerous encounters I had in my life were at checkpoints. And then when you actually go there to celebrate as a Palestinian Christian, you're faced with increasing restrictions every year and direct assault from the Israeli police and army. So definitely no religious freedoms whatsoever. I actually never celebrated Easter in Jerusalem because of all of these policies. So I think it's a very grim situation for all Palestinians, but in light of the decreasing numbers, the alarming decline in the number of Palestinian Christians, we are, I would say, as we submit in the appeal, at a very critical point. We don't want to be deprived from our Palestinian Christian presence, just like we were deprived from our Palestinian Jews. You know, we had a historic component of Palestinian Jews that Israel forcibly assimilated to it when it was created. So, in brief, it's a very grim moment.
It's probably very important to say that 3% of the Gazan Christian community has been killed since October 7th. 3% of a 1,000 population, you know. And I think enough said. I mean, we were facing the same thing in the West Bank. And Gazan Christians, you know, they're asked to be heroes. They're asked to stay in their lands while there is no source of life, you know. Everything has been destructed. Israel is trying to kill their spirit, you know. Us at our movement at Kairos Palestine, we have a board member from Gaza, and we always check on him and to see the updates from the church in Gaza. And he said his daughter, when given food, she refuses to eat. And why is that? You know, she's saying, I'm afraid that there will be no food left for the next day, you know. And I don't blame him or any Palestinian Christian living in Gaza to want to leave this their land or whatever is left from their homes. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is that as Palestinians and as Palestinian Christians, and as Dalia also mentioned, we're always asked to demonstrate hope in our daily life, in our work, and yet we're humans, you know, and not everyone wants to be a hero. We just want to be able to have our full rights, you know. I just want to wake up in the morning and not see a settlement grow in front of my eyes. I mean, from where I live, this is the view I see in the morning, settlement, you know. I want to go to Ramallah, I want to go to Jerusalem, I want to go to Gaza, I want to get to know every Palestinian community there, and I am unable to do that.
So let's think a bit about the UK then, because I know in the days and weeks and months after October, the initial response from different representatives, political for sure, but religious too, Christian, were inadequate. There have been a few apologies, sort of sorry, not sorries, issued along the way. But I would be curious to hear some reflections, perhaps from a Palestinian Christian perspective, on how these responses from the ostensibly Christian West have failed Palestinians of all denominations and none in Palestine.
I mean, massively. We are supposed to share the same faith and the same values, and these are not the values and faith that we hold as Palestinian Christians. Our faith has been weaponized against us. Our faith has been used to justify why we should be expelled from our land and live, if we survive it, in a very undignified manner, deprived from our fundamental rights. It's a faith that we never subscribed to. It's imposed on us. Those Christians, self-proclaimed Christians, believe that or interpret God to be a real estate agent that chose certain people over others. We don't prescribe to that faith at all. It's been, I don't like, as a human rights lawyer specifically, I don't like to address this from religious terms. You shouldn't wait for any God to tell you that this is wrong. Your morality, your humanity should tell you that this is wrong before any religious text does that. And if it is masked with religious justifications, we most certainly do not subscribe with that. We know our God, we know our faith, and it does not resemble that.
So how do we square something like, particularly in the Republican Party in the US, with such an aggressive Christian Zionist movement, actually even more aggressive than the Jewish Zionist movement? The Christian Zionist movement being perhaps one of the most violent agents in the colonization of Palestinian land and the total annihilation and destruction of all Palestinian people of all creeds. How is the work you guys have been doing targeting that kind of discourse? Does it target that discourse? Is that seen as a failed project, or is that something that actually has been trying to be addressed in some way or another?
Through our work at the movement I represent, Kairos Palestine, Christian Palestinian ecumenical nonviolent movement, which sheds lights on the realities of the occupation, but also it sheds light on the Palestinian Christian voice and perspective within our struggle for self-determination and justice in Palestine. And Reverend Mundir Isaac is, I guess he's he's doing an amazing job, addressing the root cause of Christian Zionism in the US, but also, just educating the world that, Palestinian Christians do exist, because it's a mix of, Christians in the US, they do not know that Palestinian Christians exist in Palestine, And part of them is also, part of what he's doing is defying and challenging the narrative that, or the misuse of the Bible against us. Because as Palestinian Christians, it basically ethnically cleanses us, this whole Christian Zionism, it puts us, in a position where we have to justify, God is not a racist God, God wouldn't say that this land belongs to a certain people, God is love, God is equality, Yes, Christian Zionism has depicted God as someone who favors one nation and one people over the other, while this is not what we as Christian Palestinians believe in. And any Christian, I don't think as a Christian, this is what you believe in, that, Palestinians should not exist on their land. So we're trying to tackle the root causes of this, particularly in the US, because, there's a big support for Israel by big movements in the US for Christian Zionism. And we're starting the work there because, it's more apparent and more obvious, and it should be tackled there as the US is fueling and, allowing this genocide to continue, and Christians are ignorant. I wouldn't say, no, in the US, we believe there is a certain type of ignorance, that, Palestinian Christians do exist. And,
I think there's tremendous efforts from Palestinian theologians nowadays to really reclaim their narrative, their theology, in showing that, you cannot reconcile Christianity as a faith with all the set of values that it brings with Zionism. These things cannot be reconciled. Even me, I struggle when I say Christian Zionism, because Zionism brings in a whole set of feelings and experiences, and Christian is my faith. I struggle to put the two together in a word. So our theologians are doing an amazing job in deconstructing this and really dissecting it and showing that Christian values cannot be reconciled with everything that the Zionist project brings in Palestine, which is the entrenchment of oppression, apartheid, annexation, what have you, the deliberate and systematic violations of fundamental rights of all Palestinians because they are Palestinians. That's been amazing. There's a lot of work to be still done to capitalize on, but I see the movement growing. I see many more people prescribing to that, and therefore I see many more attacks that they are, Palestinian theologians are receiving from other Christian Zionists. So tremendous work has been done in the US, and I think more should ensue. But at least we're there. We're challenging this.
I actually think that, in a way, also, I framed it perhaps a bit too negatively, which is obviously the association of Christian and Zionism. But there's also, I think, Christian communities, particularly in the Black radical tradition in the US, which are learning from the teachings of the Bible in support of Palestinian rights and re-establishing those connections between people who are oppressed everywhere. And in a way, going back to that Palestine is everywhere and everywhere is Palestine framework for a minute, one of the most beautiful things about this period, if any at all, is the disillusion of the idea that Palestine is a separate issue. That, as you were saying, sort of this very complicated military system is unique to Palestine. Of course, there are specificities, and we don't want to sort of put Palestine on some kind of pedestal or an exception, but it has, in a way, freed us, that people who are oppressed everywhere has been able to look at Palestinians and understood what they see, sort of a lot of themselves and their own historical oppression in that too. And I think, in a way, the Christian tradition has taught us, particularly in communities like, I keep referring Black Americans, but I think that's actually been a really interesting example. I want to bring us back to the UK for a minute. So obviously the Zionist colonization was not the first colonization. The Brits, who were masterful, mashallah, at colonizing, did a really spectacular job in Palestine in the 20-something years that they were there. And one of their fetishes was Palestinian Christians. I think they were very fascinated by this historical community which had never left the land of the Bible, in the sense that they were looking at Palestinians, actually all Palestinians, but particularly Palestinian Christians, as direct descendants of the Bible, of Jesus. And that was reflected in the way that they approached the land. And you see that in the way that they documented maps, the way that they wrote maps and delineated between villages, in the preservation and obsession with naming. They were so curious about what Palestinians, but particularly Palestinian Christians, named particular places and whether or not they appeared in the Bible. And they had whole registers and data trying to identify, did this place appear in the Bible, yes or no, which is exactly a logic the Israelis took as to when they destroyed somewhere, whether or not it had any biblical significance. And for anyone who's been to Palestine, you know, particularly in 1948 lands, there's this total disconnect between signposting of places of biblical importance and the total destruction of the community that was once there. So you mentioned, obviously, a lot of Palestinians being in the north, in the Galilee area. When I was driving around the Galilee last summer, as in not the summer, just ending the one before, we kept seeing signs to Jacob's well, as in, Joseph's well. Oh my God. Who fell down the well? Joseph's, is it Jake? A well with a very important biblical figure down it. And there are these signs all over this area around Safad, or what is now, where Safad once was, it's still there, but all of these signs to this well. And I became totally fixated. I wanted to know what was there, who lived there. So we kept following these signs, and in the end, it turned out to be this biblical fairy, like Disneyland, that they had commemorated this well, but not the two villages that existed around it. And those communities, if you read, Walid Khalidi or other testimonies, they now live as refugees in Syria. The Palestinians who lived there, the Palestinian Christians who lived there, are refugees in the West Bank or in Syria or in Jordan, but this commemoration of this biblical place exists. So you see this disconnect between the desire for they want to claim the Palestinian Christian history, but they don't want to claim the Palestinians themselves. So you're in the UK, you're in this colonial metropole, welcome. I am curious about what the conversations you're going to be having over the next few days are around this issue. How do you circle the square, or how do you make sense of the role that British colonization played towards Palestinians, but especially Palestinian Christians, with the current British political establishment line, and how do you operate in that liminal space between the two?
Okay, so I'll give you a case example from Bethlehem, and I think that serves as an example for all of the West Bank. So currently in Bethlehem, in the governorate, so not the city, but the governorate of Bethlehem, most of it is labeled as Area C, Area C is the area where, according to the Oslo Accords, Israel is to have exclusive control, like security, quote unquote, and civil. So Israel exploits this kind of control, exclusive control, to really push for its annexation agenda. So in Bethlehem, where you have the concentration of Palestinian Christians nowadays, if you look at the west of Bethlehem, you have two amazingly beautiful and interconnected valleys, the Kremizan Valley and Al-Makhrur Valley. Both of them are the last green areas we have for us in Bethlehem. This is not to say that we didn't have many. We had plenty of them, but these are the last ones remaining after Israel colonized all of the other green and open space areas. Both of them are parts of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They have human heritage and history in that. So precious, so valuable, to the extent where they are prescribed as part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Batir one. And both of them are super rich in biodiversity. They have very important ecological systems, water resources. Both of them are super connected to the Palestinian Christian heritage in the area. In Kremizan, you have church lands and privately owned lands, mostly by Palestinian Christians. In Al-Makhrur, over 91% of the ownership of the valley belongs to Palestinian Christians. And, since generations ago. And they're in close vicinity to Jerusalem, surrounded by settlements. Kremizan, you have the annexation wall surrounding the entire valley. In Al-Makhrur, settlements surrounding the area, and lands are confiscated to not only establish the settlements, but to expand their infrastructure. And the better the infrastructure, like the roads, the more settlers are moved there, and then the need to expand the settlement. We have approvals of new settlements in the areas. So in total 3. If you look at the pattern of how the settlements are placed, you will see that the idea is to annex the whole area to, quote unquote, a greater Jerusalem. Now, if you look at how Israel was able to entrench its control in these areas, the lands that were uprooted to build the annexation wall, and most of them are Roman olive trees that were uprooted. Roman, that means they were probably there when Jesus was walking in Palestine, and they were uprooted by the Israeli bulldozers. It was a British company that was operating there and uprooting these trees. And one of the things we were calling for is, companies cannot be profiting off grave breaches of international law and war crimes. If you look at the demolitions that sometimes Israel carries out, I say sometimes because not all demolitions are carried out using these specific laws. Some of them come from the British mandate, not all of them. Depends on the type of demolitions, Israelis are super good with, driving you to details and not really challenging the policy. But, Israel cherry picks what kind of law it wants to use. Sometimes we have laws dating back from the Ottoman era to the British mandate, in designing this discriminatory planning system, planning and zoning, that allows settlements to grow unabated, whereas it limits Palestinians' existence and structure and keeps demolishing. It's basically cherry picking from the law, and one of the laws available for them to do that are the British mandate laws. If you look at how Israel was able to entrench its annexation and oppression, it's because of the absolute lack of accountability. There's no accountability whatsoever, and this allowed the violations to go from bad to worse to an extremely severe, all the way where we end up with a genocide when we haven't even healed from the first one, the Nakba. We haven't healed from that. We didn't get to heal from it because it's ongoing, and now there's a new genocide. And we're always reminding Britain of its very special responsibility in what's going on in Palestine. It should be taking the lead in ending this impunity and rectifying what it has done. It should be taking the lead. Instead of really, like, even when the partial suspension of license on the arms trade was introduced, you felt that it was highlighted today that Britain was behaving like, oh, sorry, we had to, instead of saying no, we take the lead into putting an end to impunity. There's ample evidence of all the violations. The facts are there. Everyone can see it. Facts are there. The statistics are there. The legal analysis is crystal clear. Any serious legal scholarship will tell you that these things are grave violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, what have you. Recently, we're having confirmations from the International Court of Justice on its advisory opinion, and last one coming out this July. I mean, side note, it's frustrating. As Palestinians, we wrote these kinds of things. I don't remember the number of times that I wrote this legal analysis with the same conclusions, but okay, let's not hear Palestinians. Let's wait for international organizations to confirm basically what we're saying for decades. But there's just absolutely facts are there, law is there, everything is there. What's holding you back from putting an end to this impunity? And the thing is, when you fail to hold a country accountable, it crosses borders. It becomes, so it's going on from Gaza, now moving to the West Bank, and trust me, the neighboring countries will not also be. That's the thing about impunity. Inaccountability. If you don't put an end to it, it grows. It breeds more violations. It breeds more impunity. And we are living that in Palestine.
And then I'm sure you perhaps saw as well, but David Lammy justifying the position by describing himself as a liberal progressive Zionist, whatever that means. I mean,
mental gymnastics.
Yeah, acrobats. He's an acrobat. I'm conscious that we are starting to come up on time. I'm curious. I want to go back to Christmas because the Reverend's address at Christmas, which went viral, and I'm sure many, if not everyone in the audience who is here today, saw that address. Christmas was a very strange spectacle the year just gone because everyone was getting together with their families to break bread and have a meal to commemorate the birth of a figure who was born in Palestine. And who, if he lived today, would not be able to leave Bethlehem at all and live with absolutely no semblance of any human dignity or justice. I'm curious, I know it's still September, I don't want to be that person that takes us over to Christmas, but we are approaching another Christmas now, and we're starting to see the reappropriation of the Christian mythology and scripture and its appropriation to justify all kinds of sins. How are you conceiving of this, another landmark in the Christian calendar under these conditions? How are you looking forward to celebrating? What does celebrating mean? And how do you mark your rage in these times?
With a heavy heart, with a terribly heavy heart. Aside from the theology and what Christmas represents, which I'm not an expert in, but I'll go to the social part of it if you want. It's a time of celebration, gathering with the family, praying together, and honestly, we feel guilty about having food on our table. We feel guilty about having like a shelter over our head. because you're always I feel guilty about hugging my son at the end of the day. I feel guilty about the simplest pleasures in life that I took for granted. Notably in Christmas, where you are gathering with a big family. I no longer have a big family. Most of them have left because of what's going on, because of all of the atrocities and terrible life that we have in the West Bank. And, you know, I feel terrible because I think of all of those who lost so many family members. I lost them to immigration. They left to seek a better life. But those who stayed under the rubble, those who could not even be dignified in their death, those who will be missed in times like that. Christmas should represent hope. And as I said, it's something that you struggle to really create in you every day. Honestly, celebration is no longer something you think positive. It should have positive connotation when you say celebration and hope, but no, not nowadays. It's even heavier when you have an occasion to celebrate. It feels heavier on the heart.
I remember something Reverend Munder said in his sermon, Christ Under the Rubble. He said, I think we should always celebrate Christmas this way, you know, no decorations, no Christmas trees, because we will truly feel the essence of Christmas within us. And he referred to a Palestinian Christians from Gaza, from the church, who's taking refuge in the church. And he said when he talked to him, he told the Palestinian Christian in Gaza, he said, I will celebrate Christmas, you know. And I mean, his soul is not broken, you know. He's full of hope of Jesus under the rubble, you know. Because as Reverend Munder said, if Jesus was born today, he would be born under the rubble. So it's a tough question, as Dalia said, you know, how do we reflect on a second Christmas under the rubble? We cling to our hope, you know, to God first, you know, and the humanity of every person, you know, and yeah, that's what we're here in the UK doing, you know, pushing for more concrete actions, you know. We don't want to arrive at Christmas and have another Christmas under the rubble. No. Yeah.
Thank you. It feels like a low note to leave things on, but I think that's perhaps appropriate for not just this week or this month, but perhaps for the last 76 years. I think, well, I first of all want to thank you both for coming to this really bleak country, but for sharing your insights tonight. And I also just want to acknowledge that this work is community work and it's collective work, and we will continue and are continuing. And as bleak and as terrible and as ruinous and apocalyptic as it feels in Gaza and across Palestine, we are there with you in our spirit, and our struggle continues here to hold this government to account. And with all oppressed people all over the world. Thank you both for coming. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank
and
you,
I just
Zena.
want to say there's also, I think, food in the bar, kitchen area. All proceeds go to Gaza. Thank you to Earth for opening up this incredible space. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.